Factoring quadratics. What is this nightmare all about? Hi, I'm Johnny Castles of Primetime Tutoring, and today I want to talk to you about factoring quadratics and why, unlike myself, you shouldn't want to think about taking a bath with your electric toaster after spending 15 minutes with this stuff. So the first thing that we should address is, what in God's name is factoring? High school Johnny Castles would have had no idea. In fact, high school Johnny Castles didn't even know his own postal code on a good day. So I can understand that there's a lot of confusion surrounding this idea of factoring. But let's take it back to something that we're perhaps a little more familiar with. Now, I'm going to make an assumption that most of you have gone through expanding at this point. And the reason why I say most of you is because, to be honest, it seems like a lot of course curriculums are planned with, a feces-flinging monkey and a topic list.
Oh shit, God damn it, look.
Oh. So let's relate it to the idea of expanding under the assumption that this is something you've already been taught. So expanding. What exactly does this mean? Let's go through an example here. We have 2x bracket x minus 6 bracket. You want to think of the 2x as you as a teenager and the x minus 6 as a house party. You want to get in the house party. And that's what the 2x wants to do, is it wants to get in the house party. So how does it get in? Multiplication. So the 2x through the distributive property goes in and multiplies the x and the negative 6. So 2x times x is 2x squared. Negative 6 times 2x is negative 12x. And what we have is 2x squared minus 12x. That's what we would call expanded form. Now, factoring is the idea of just going backwards from this. This idea of backwards math is something you're going to deal with all the time in high school. My God, there have been so many instances in my life where I wish I could have gone backwards. Nights of heavy drinking, voting for George Bush in 2004, all sorts of opportunities where I wish I could turn things around. So in math, this is like the Terminator. It's I'll be back.
I'll be back.
So, we've established that expanding is connected with multiplying. So, this notion of backwards math would then imply that factoring is connected with dividing. And I know this may seem really pointless, that you've learned expanding, which then, results in multiplying, and now you're learning factoring, which results in dividing, and we're almost undoing the expanding. It almost seems as pointless as, going on a movie date with Ray Charles. But this is what the course curriculum is going to require of you, so we got to make sure we can execute effectively. So come Friday night, we're not chained in,
Today, Junior?
We're not chained to our desks factoring quadratics. We're out ripping it up with our friends. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take that expanded binomial that we looked at before, 2x squared minus 12x, and we're going to factor this. Now, factoring is kind of the idea of, deporting.
I am going to create a new special deportation task force.
The greatest common factor out of both numbers. So you can imagine now that you got someone inside that house party that's had a few too many cocktails and we want to turf them out the front door. So what do? Well, with expanding, we established that multiplication was what we needed to do. So now, with factoring, we're going to be using division, because again, it's that idea of backwards math. So, we identify the GCF. Now, by the way, if you have difficulty identifying the GCF, I got a video on this. It's super deluxe, and I'd strongly recommend you check it out. So, we identify the GCF between 2x squared and minus 12x. The GCF between those two numbers is 2x. And what we're going to do is we're going to divide each of those numbers by 2x, and then plot the 2x in front of a set of brackets. So what we would end up with is 2x bracket x minus 6 close bracket. The x comes from dividing 2x squared by 2x, and the negative 6 comes from dividing 12x by 2x, and the negative is in between both terms. Now, let's apply this factoring idea to a more complex context, a quadratic. Now, a quadratic is an expression that contains an x squared. And what we're going to be doing to factor a quadratic is a little more complicated than merely identifying a GCF and dividing. So our first step is we need to make sure the quadratic is in the right order. And when I say the right order, I mean that we have the x squared written first, then the term containing x second, and then the constant, the term with no x, written third. Once we've written it in that order, we now need to label our coefficients and our constant. The coefficient on the x squared will be labeled as a. The coefficient on the x will be labeled as b, and the coefficient on c, well, it's a constant, so we don't even call it a coefficient. That's my 8 concussions kicking in right there. It's a miracle that I can dress myself in the morning, although based on what I'm wearing right now, it doesn't look like I'm doing too good of a job.
Got him! Got him!
Anyways, here's the key part. And you want to follow me here because you're going to think that I'm under the influence of Schedule A narcotics, which I'm not. Don't do drugs, stay in school.
Do you take drugs or alcohol?
What is drugs? 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 What is drugs?
We need to find two factors of the product of AC that add to B. Now, let's go through an example to make this whole A times C that adds to B business a little bit easier to understand. Our example quadratic will be x squared minus 7x plus 12. Now, right away, I notice it's in the right order. The x squared is first, the x is second, and the constant is last, so that's great. So now I got to go about labeling my coefficients and my constant. So a would be 1 in this case, because although it's x squared, we can always imagine that there's a 1 as a coefficient of a variable. B would be negative 7, and C would be positive 12. So now, our next step is to do A times C. A in this case was 1, C was 12, A times C, 1 times 12 is 12. Next, we have to label B. B in this case is just negative 7, so we have B equals negative 7. Now here comes the hard part. We need to find two numbers that multiply to 12, but add or subtract to negative 7. The way I recommend we do this is by going through all of the factors of 12, starting with the smallest one. So the smallest factor I know of would be 1 in 12. Now, little Johnny Castles might have thought that 1 in 12 could add up to 7, but then again, little Johnny Castles had test scores that could have been easily mistaken for his shoe size. So 1 in 12 are out. Next, we look at 2 and 6. Is there any way 2 and 6 can be added or subtracted to form negative 7? Again, same joke. Wouldn't work. We next move on to 3 and 4. Well, I know that 3 plus 4 gives me 7, so I'm a little bit hopeful here, but we need it to equal negative 7. So I look at negative 3 and negative 4. Negative 3 times negative 4 gives me positive 12. That's exactly what I'm looking for. And negative 3 plus negative 4 gives me negative 7. So right away, I now have my two numbers that multiply to the product of AC and add or subtract to B. So now we've reached a great moment. This is that moment when you were a little kid and The Simpsons came on after the Fox 29 Cheektowaga news, where the biggest piece of news was a dumpster fire behind an Arby's. This is that great moment. It's the last day of school before Christmas holiday. We have our two factors. So then the question then becomes, well, what do we do with them? With this negative 3 and this negative 4, what we're going to do is we're going to write them in what we call factored form. Factored form has two brackets that are written next to each other with an X at the front. And what we do is we take our two factors and we plug them in to each bracket. So my first bracket is going to be x minus 3, because one of our factors was -3. My second bracket is going to be x minus 4, because my second factor was -4. Don't forget, we figured out that -3 and -4 multiply to 12 and add or subtract to -7. So that's why I'm plugging those two numbers into the brackets. Now, for the more observant viewers out there, you might have noticed, assuming your teacher doesn't employ the feces flinging approach, that those two brackets are how you learn to FOIL. And FOIL is a fancy, well, not even fancy, it's an acronym for first, outside, inside, last, and it helps us expand binomials. Again, this whole idea of backwards math. So now what we have is our factored quadratic. This question, which once seemed as scary as that ex-girlfriend or ex-boyfriend who would call and hang up, or in some cases burn dolls of you in effigy on your front lawn, is now a very simple and easy to handle problem. And what this allows you to do is, if it's Friday night, you're going out with your friends. If it's Saturday afternoon, you're going for a run, you're going to the gym, you're playing road hockey, or you're watching Netflix. I really hope that this video has helped you with factoring quadratics. If you're looking to factor what we call complex quadratics, where the a value isn't 1, there's a video on my channel that you can check out. And again, it's the same idea. It's going to make it simple so you can be out ripping it up and having fun instead of grinding away on math. Thanks so much for walking. Ah, fuck! I got all caught up with the keep rocking and I glitched. Again, thanks so much guys for watching. I hope you keep rocking and rolling in the free world, and hopefully I'll see you guys soon.